Dust rolled across the main street of Red Hollow as a lone rider appeared on the horizon. The horse moved slowly, its head low, carrying a woman whose face was hidden beneath a pale veil. The townsfolk paused in their daily work. They set down buckets, leaned on brooms, and squinted against the harsh sun. Strangers rarely came this way, and none dressed like her. She sat tall, quiet, as if every eye on her didn't matter, yet her gloved hands clutched the reins too tightly. At the hitching post near the general store, she dismounted with careful steps. Her boots touched the dirt like she wasn't sure if she belonged. The veil hung heavy, keeping her features in shadow. A boy tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why doesn't she show her face?" The mother pulled him close, whispering something about trouble that always followed a covered face. By the saloon doors, men muttered. "Mark my words," one said, "nothing good comes riding in veiled like that." Another spat into the dust. "Hiding from someone or hiding from the law." Their laughter was low, uneasy. Already rumors had begun. Inside the store, the woman set her coins on the counter, voice soft but steady. "Flour, beans, soap if you have it." The shopkeeper hesitated, his eyes flicking to her covered face, then to the window where the crowd lingered. He wrapped the goods without a word, but when she lifted the bag, he leaned close and muttered, "Best you keep moving, miss. Folks don't take kindly to secrets in a small place like this." She nodded, though her shoulders stiffened. Without answering, she carried the bag outside. The townspeople had spread out, pretending to go about their business, but their eyes never left her. She tied the supplies to her horse, trying not to tremble under the weight of their stares. That's when Elias Kane stepped from the blacksmith shed across the street, broad-shouldered, sunburnt, a man who carried silence the way others carried a gun. He'd been widowed 2 winters past, and since then, kept to himself on his ranch beyond the ridge. But something in the way the woman stood, isolated, weathered by the looks thrown her way, pulled him forward. He crossed the street slowly. Dust rose around his boots. When he spoke, his voice was even, without judgment. "You need a place to rest your horse?" The woman froze. For a long breath, she said nothing, then finally nodded. Her veil shifted in the breeze, almost letting slip the line of her jaw. "If it's no trouble." "Trouble's already found you," Elias said, not unkindly. He gestured toward the livery. "Come on. My ranch is a few miles out. Safer than here." The crowd murmured, louder now. Someone hissed, "She's got no right staying here." Another barked, "Elias, you don't know who you're dealing with." But Elias didn't look back. He simply took the woman's bag, slung it over his arm, and led her horse toward the stable. His calm manner only seemed to stir more whispers. The woman walked beside him, silent but aware of the storm around her. Her secret pressed like a stone against her chest. She had crossed miles of desert to escape the shadow of her name. But here too, suspicion traveled faster than the wind. She lowered her veil further, as if fabric alone could shield her from their eyes. But Red Hollow wasn't ready for what her secret would cost. By the time Elias handed her back the reins, the choice was made. Whether she spoke her story or not, the town had already written one for her. And in Red Hollow, a story could save or destroy you. The sheriff's office door creaked open just as Elias and the veiled woman led the horse from the livery. Sheriff Dalton, tall and sharp-eyed, stepped onto the boardwalk. His hand rested near his belt, not on the gun, but close enough to remind everyone it was there. He watched the pair without a word until Elias tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Elias said. Dalton's gaze drifted to the woman. "Afternoon. Don't believe I've seen you in Red Hollow before." The woman's voice was quiet but steady. "Just passing through." Dalton's eyes narrowed, studying the veil. "Folks pass through. They don't hide their faces." His words carried to the small crowd that had begun gathering again, feeding their unease. Elias stepped in before the silence could turn heavier. "She's tired. I'll see her settled at my place." Dalton didn't argue, but his stare lingered on the woman as if he was trying to pull her secret straight through the cloth. Finally, he nodded. "Your land, Kane, but watch yourself. The town's on edge these days." With that, he turned back inside, leaving behind a tension thicker than smoke. The woman kept her head down, following Elias toward his wagon. They loaded her supplies and mounted up, steering the team out of town. The road wound past dry creek beds and sagebrush hills, silence filling the space between them. "You don't owe me answers," Elias said at last, his voice rough from disuse, "but you'll find Red Hollow less forgiving than I am." Her hands gripped the edge of the wagon bench. "I didn't come for forgiveness." She paused, her words brittle. "I came to start over." Elias didn't press her. He only nodded, guiding the horses along. The sound of the wheels over dirt filled the emptiness between their thoughts. Behind them in the town, whispers spread faster than wildfire. By sundown, the general store had pinned a notice on its wall. "Stage robbed. Outlaws wanted. Reward offered." The poster showed rough sketches of the gang, hard-eyed men with bandanas covering their faces. But at the bottom, smudged and faint, was a woman's likeness. The resemblance was close enough that even those who hadn't seen her unveiled were convinced. "That's her," a man swore at the saloon. "She's one of them." Others nodded, though none could be certain. The sheriff said nothing, only watched as gossip took root. Knowing once suspicion set in, it was nearly impossible to dig out. Meanwhile, Elias drove the wagon up a narrow ridge, the land opening wide to a lonely valley below. His ranch stood quiet against the horizon, a weathered barn, corral, and a cabin built by his own hands after the fire that had taken his wife. He guided the horses to a halt. "This is it," he said. "Not much, but it's steady." The woman lifted her veil slightly, just enough to take in the view. For a brief moment her shoulders eased as though the land itself offered a kind of safety. Elias noticed but looked away, busying himself with the harness. "You can stay in the spare room. You'll earn your keep the same as anyone else who's worked here." "No questions asked," her voice softened. "Thank you." But as the last light of day slid behind the hills, Elias caught the way she studied the horizon, like she expected riders to appear at any moment. He said nothing, though the unease in his gut told him trouble would soon follow. Morning came with a thin mist over the valley. Elias was already outside chopping wood when he noticed the woman stepping onto the porch. She moved carefully as though every sound might betray her. The veil still covered her face, but the weight of it seemed heavier now. "You sleep?" Elias asked, setting the axe into the block. "A little," she said. Her voice carried the weariness of someone who hadn't known real rest in a long while. Elias nodded toward the barn. "Water pumps round the back. I'll show you where the chores start." She followed, listening as he explained the routine. Feed for the horses, milk for the cow, and mending that never seemed to end. She didn't complain. Instead, she worked steadily beside him, her gloved hands quick and sure. He saw in her movements a discipline, like someone who had lived hard and learned to endure. By noon, she wiped her brow and asked quietly, "You trust strangers often?" Elias leaned on the fence rail, watching the sky. "No, but I've seen what it's like to be talked about without folks knowing the truth." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. His wife's grave, marked by a simple wooden cross on the hill, told enough. The woman lowered her head. "People don't forgive easily." "They don't have to," Elias replied. "You just keep standing till the storm passes." Back in town, the storm was already brewing. At the saloon, the wanted poster had become the talk of every table. Men argued over the sketch, pointing out the veil, the mystery. "She's hiding her face 'cause she don't want folks seeing what's on it," one man declared. Another slapped the poster. "Look at that jawline, tell me it doesn't match." The sheriff listened from his corner, jaw tight. He hadn't confirmed anything yet, but he knew how quickly words could turn to fists and fists to gunfire. By evening, a rider galloped into town carrying another stack of notices. These were clearer, printed straight from the territorial office. Wanted, members of the Callahan gang, known for stagecoach robbery and murder, dangerous, shoot on sight. And there again was the faint sketch of a veiled woman. The town gasped. "It's her!" voices cried.
She's one of them.
The blacksmith slammed his hammer against the anvil. And Elias Kane's got her out at his place. You think it's a coincidence? Murmurs turned to accusations. Suspicion leaped like sparks in dry grass. Out at the ranch, Elias and the woman shared a quiet supper. The lantern light flickered, shadows moving across the wooden walls. He studied her hands as she lifted her cup. They were calloused, strong, but they trembled when the wind rattled the shutters. You got someone after you, Elias said plainly. She froze, then set the cup down. For a long moment she didn't answer. Finally, her words slipped out like a confession. I left behind a life I can't return to. That's all I can say for now. Elias held her gaze through the veil. The truth has a way of coming out whether you speak it or not. Outside, coyotes howled across the valley, their cries sharp and haunting. The woman shivered. Elias reached for another log to feed the fire. Neither of them spoke again, but the silence was heavy, as though both knew the world outside the cabin was already turning against them. The next day, the sound of hooves broke the quiet valley. Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw two riders climbing the ridge toward his ranch. He recognized the sheriff's horse before the dust settled. Sheriff Dalton reined in, flanked by the blacksmith who had ridden along as a witness. Dalton dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. His face was firm, his eyes searching. Elias, we need to talk. Elias kept his voice calm. Go ahead. Dalton nodded toward the cabin. It's about her. The town's in an uproar. Posters came in yesterday, Callahan gang. You know what that means. The blacksmith spat into the dirt. She matches the picture. She's trouble, Kane. You're harboring a criminal. From the porch, the veiled woman stood still, her hands folded tight at her waist. She didn't run. She didn't speak. The wind tugged at her veil, and for a moment the outline of her cheekbone showed clearly. The resemblance to the sketch was undeniable. Dalton's tone softened, but it carried weight. I ain't saying she's guilty, but I've got a duty. Town's close to breaking. If you keep her here, they'll turn on you too. Elias looked from the sheriff to the woman, then back. She's under my roof. I'll see to her. The blacksmith barked a laugh. You'll lose your land, Kane. You'll lose everything. Dalton sighed. I'll give you time. But I can't hold the town back forever. Decide what you're risking. He swung into his saddle, the blacksmith following with a curse under his breath. Dust rose behind them as they rode away, leaving silence heavy on the ranch. The woman turned to Elias, her voice low. You should have let them take me. Elias shook his head. I don't turn people out because others talk loudly. Her hands trembled. She gripped the porch rail as if it held her upright. You don't know who I am. I don't need to, Elias said simply. But I know fear when I see it. And I know guilt. His eyes narrowed. You're running, but not from what they think. For the first time, her shoulders sagged, the weight of her secret almost breaking through. But she said nothing, only turned back inside, the veil brushing the doorframe as she vanished into shadow. That night, Red Hollow burned with talk. Men in the saloon swore they'd seen the outlaw woman themselves. Women whispered over laundry lines, saying Elias had lost his senses, maybe even joined the gang. The general store clerk refused to sell supplies to anyone riding out toward Kane's ranch. Fear was spreading, twisting into anger. The sheriff sat alone in his office, the posters spread on his desk. He rubbed his temple. He didn't want to see Elias ruined, but he knew the town's patience was thin. Back at the ranch, Elias sat by the fire, his dog resting at his feet. Across the room, the woman sewed a torn shirt with steady hands. The quiet between them was thick but not empty. You're safer here than out there, Elias said finally. Her needle paused. She didn't lift her head. Safe doesn't last. Elias didn't argue. He only studied the flames, knowing she was right. Somewhere out there, whoever she was hiding from would come, and when they did, the ranch and perhaps the whole town would be caught in the storm. 2 days passed. The ranch carried its usual rhythm, chores, repairs, meals in silence, but a shadow hung over every hour. The woman worked hard, never complaining, yet Elias noticed how often her eyes searched the horizon. It was as if she expected riders to appear at any moment. That morning, while Elias mended the fence, he saw her by the barn. She had lifted her veil slightly, believing herself unseen. The sun touched her face, showing lines of exhaustion, a beauty worn thin by fear. She caught him watching and quickly covered again. "Why hide?" Elias asked, setting down his hammer. Her voice was sharp with panic. "Because the truth will ruin us both." Elias stepped closer, his tone steady. "The town already believes the worst. Let me hear it from you." Her hands balled into fists. For a moment she looked ready to flee, but instead she whispered, "They think I'm part of the Callahan gang. I'm not." Elias frowned. "Then why does the poster show your face?" Her shoulders slumped. She leaned against the barn wall, veil slipping back. Her voice broke. "Because my brother made sure of it." Elias froze. Her words spilled fast, desperate. Caleb Callahan, leader of the gang. He was always wild, always hungry for more than an honest life gave him. When he started robbing coaches, I begged him to stop. I even went to the law once. He found out. To keep me quiet, he framed me, told his men to swear I rode with them. He spread lies, gave them my likeness. Now every poster shows me as one of them. Elias studied her, searching her eyes. "And you ran?" "Yes," she whispered. "Because if I stayed, they'd have killed me. Or worse, made me useful to the gang. I thought if I kept moving, I could find a place where the posters hadn't reached yet. But Red Hollow already believes." For the first time, Elias saw tears streak her cheeks. She turned her face away, ashamed. Elias's voice was low but firm. "You should have told me sooner." "I couldn't," she said. "Everywhere I've gone, the truth has only made things worse. People hear Callahan and they don't care about right or wrong. They just see a price on my head." Elias was silent, weighing her words. Finally, he said, "If your brother put you on those posters, he'll come for you. Not just the law, him. He can't let you walk free with what you know." Her hands shook. "That's why I don't deserve your help. I'll only bring death to your door." Elias stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "My door's already marked. Folks think I'm guilty just for keeping you here. Whether you stay or go, trouble's coming. Might as well face it together." Her breath caught, and for the first time since arriving, she met his eyes without the veil. The raw truth between them was heavier than any rumor. Far off, a hawk circled above the ridge, its cry sharp against the sky. Elias turned toward the sound, his jaw tight. He knew what was coming. The Callahan gang would not stay distant forever. Inside the barn, the woman sank to her knees, whispering a prayer beneath her breath, as if asking heaven to give her the strength she no longer trusted herself to hold. The sun baked the valley hard the next afternoon. Elias was fixing the roof when he saw a swirl of dust on the trail far below. 3 riders. They weren't pushing fast, but they were coming steady, their figures sharp against the horizon. He climbed down, jaw tight. The woman saw them too from the porch. Her veil shifted as she whispered, "They've found me." "Could be anyone," Elias said, though his hand lingered near the rifle leaning against the post. He knew better. By the time the riders reached town, Red Hollow was already restless. The men dismounted at the saloon, their horses lathered and mean. They wore long coats despite the heat, hats pulled low. One of them slapped a poster onto the wall, his voice carrying, "We're hunting this woman. Word is she's hiding nearby. There's a reward for whoever hands her over." The townsfolk gathered fast. Whispers flew. The blacksmith stepped forward, eyes burning. "Elias Kane's got her on his ranch." The strangers smiled. One tipped his hat. "Then Kane's a fool. He'll give her up or we'll take her." The sheriff pushed through the crowd, hand resting on his holster. "You'll keep your threats out of my town." The tallest rider sneered. "Then you bring her to us. Save yourself the trouble." Dalton didn't answer. His silence was enough to let the crowd know what storm had just broken over Red Hollow. Out at the ranch, Elias and the woman worked in uneasy quiet. She washed clothes at the pump while he checked the barn doors twice over. Finally, she broke the silence. They'll turn against you. All of them. The sheriff, the town, they'll believe the gang before they believe me. Elias glanced at her, his voice rough. Maybe, but I don't measure a person by what others say. Her eyes filled with sorrow. You'll lose everything you've built. Land can be rebuilt, Elias said. A man's word once broken, that's harder to fix. That evening, as the sun bled red behind the hills, hoofbeats thundered again. This time closer, Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. 4 riders paused at the edge of his land, watching from the shadows. They didn't ride closer, but they didn't leave either. They're waiting, Elias muttered. The woman's breath caught. For nightfall. They'll come under dark. Elias studied the horizon. Maybe. Or maybe they're waiting for the town to do their work for them. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than ever. The woman sat near the fire, veil drawn back, face pale. Elias, if I run now, maybe I can draw them away. He shook his head sharply. That's not running. That's handing yourself to wolves. I won't see it. She looked at him, her voice broke. Why are you doing this? For a long moment, Elias didn't answer. Then he said, Because I've buried someone I loved once. I won't stand by and see it happen again. Outside, the riders lit a small fire of their own, camped just beyond the ridge. Their laughter carried on the wind, cruel and taunting. The woman stared into the flames inside the cabin, her hands clutching her skirt. She knew her brother was near. That laugh was one she could never forget. And when he came, he would not only claim her name, but burn down everything Elias had left. Night fell heavily over the valley. The Callahan riders' fire glowed faintly beyond the ridge, their shadows stretching long against the flames. The air felt charged, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, Elias checked his rifle again, sliding shells into place. The woman sat at the table, hands folded tight, veil lying forgotten beside her. Her face was pale but set. The truth of who she was no longer hidden. They won't wait much longer, she whispered. Elias nodded. They're trying to make you afraid enough to walk to him yourself. She shook her head. They don't need me alive. My brother only wants silence. If the town doesn't give me up, the gang will tear this place apart. Elias rested the rifle against the wall. Then the town has a choice to make. At dawn, hoofbeats thundered down Red Hollow's main street. The Callahan riders had come bold, no longer camping quietly. Caleb Callahan himself rode at their head, his scarred face half shadowed under his hat. He swung down from his horse and nailed a poster to the sheriff's office door. Sheriff Dalton, he called, his voice booming. You got someone on your land who doesn't belong. She's blood to me, but she's also a traitor. Hand her over, and there'll be no bloodshed here. The townsfolk poured from homes and shops, faces pale. Caleb's men sat on their horses like wolves, rifles glinting. The sheriff stepped out slowly, his jaw set. You can't bring a lynching to my town, Dalton said. Caleb grinned. I ain't bringing one. I'm offering you a choice. Bring her down from Kane's ranch or we'll take her. And if we have to ride through you to get her. His smile turned cold. So be it, the crowd murmured, fear rising like a tide. The blacksmith stepped forward, voice hard. We don't need their fight here. Let 'em have her. Kane knew the risk. Others shouted in agreement. Women pulled their children close, whispering prayers. But a few faces turned uneasy, guilt flickering in their eyes. Dalton raised a hand for quiet. No decision gets made in the street. I'll talk to Kane myself. By midday, the sheriff's horse climbed the ridge. He found Elias waiting outside the cabin, rifle across his arm. The woman stood just behind him, veil gone, her eyes clear. Dalton dismounted slowly. They're here, Elias, and they won't leave without her. Elias's voice was steady. She ain't guilty. Dalton's eyes flicked to the woman. Maybe not. But the gang doesn't care. And the town? The town's close to handing her over just to save themselves. The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. Then let me go. I won't see this land burn because of me. Elias shook his head. You leave, they win. They've already taken your name. I won't let 'em take the rest. Dalton sighed deeply, looking between them. You're making a stand that may cost you everything. Elias set his jaw. Some things are worth that. The sheriff studied them both, then finally nodded. Then you'll have to be ready. By nightfall they'll ride up here. And when they do, you won't be standing alone. The town has to decide if it'll fight with you or against you. The woman's breath caught. For the first time, a flicker of hope sparked in her chest. But she also knew hope was fragile, and the cost of it might be more blood than Red Hollow could bear. The sun sank behind the ridge, painting the valley in blood-red light. Elias stood outside the cabin, rifle slung across his chest. The woman was beside him, her veil folded in her hands. She no longer hid her face. If death were coming, she would meet it unveiled. Far off, the sound of hooves grew louder, steady, pounding, closer. The Callahan gang rode like a storm, dust rising behind them. Caleb Callahan led at the front, his hat pulled low, his grin sharp as a blade. "Clara," he shouted when he was close enough. His voice rolled across the land. "Little sister, come out. You've run far enough." The woman stiffened, her name exposed to the night. Elias stepped in front of her, his voice calm but unyielding. "She's not yours to claim." Caleb laughed, swinging down from his horse. "Not mine. She carries my blood. She carries my shame. She knows what no one else does, and for that she dies." He raised his hand and his men spread out, rifles ready. Just then the crunch of boots echoed on the ridge. More figures appeared, townsfolk from Red Hollow. The sheriff stood at their head, shotgun in his grip. Behind him were the blacksmith, the storekeeper, and even a few farmers. Their faces were grim, but they had come. Caleb's grin faltered. "So the town grows a spine?" Dalton raised his voice. "This ain't about one woman. This is about you bringing your gang into our valley. We won't hand her over, not today." The blacksmith shifted uneasily, sweat dripping down his neck. He had been loudest against the woman, but even he stood in the line now, hammer hanging at his belt. Fear and shame warred in his eyes. Elias lifted his rifle, sight fixed steady on Caleb. "You ride back down that trail, and this ends. You keep coming." Caleb's hand dropped to his gun. "Then it ends another way." The first shot cracked the silence. No one could say who fired it. The valley erupted. Gunfire flashed, echoing against the hills. Horses reared and screamed. Men shouted, ducking behind rocks and fences. Elias fired twice, dropping one of Caleb's riders. Beside him, Clara crouched low, clutching the porch rail. The sheriff's shotgun boomed, scattering another outlaw from his horse. Caleb stormed forward, his revolver blazing. "She's mine!" he roared, bullets splintering the porch posts. Elias dove to cover her, returning fire. Smoke thickened. The clash felt endless, a storm of dust and flame. But slowly the tide turned. The townsfolk, once divided, now fought side by side. Their bullets pushed the gang back step by step. Caleb, furious, charged closer, his eyes locked on Clara. "You'll die for betraying me." Clara stood suddenly, no longer hiding. Her voice cut through the chaos. "No, brother. You'll die for what you've done." Her words stalled him for a heartbeat, just enough. Elias fired, his bullet striking true. Caleb staggered, his revolver slipping from his hand. His face twisted with shock and rage before he fell to the dirt. The gunfire slowed. The gang, leaderless, broke apart. Some fled into the hills, their shouts fading into the night. Others lay silent in the dust. Silence returned, heavy and strange. The townsfolk lowered their weapons, staring at the woman who had been their shadow of suspicion. Her veil lay forgotten at her feet. Her face was bare, eyes shining with tears and fire. She had been accused, hunted, and almost destroyed. But now her brother's fall stood as proof that her story had always been true. The smoke drifted low over the valley, carrying the sharp smell of gunpowder and dust. Horses snorted nervously, stamping the ground as the echoes of battle faded into silence. Elias lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. Across the yard, townsfolk slowly stepped out from cover, faces pale, hands shaking. They had stood their ground, though many still looked stunned that they had done it. Sheriff Dalton walked forward, shotgun still in his grip, eyes fixed on the lifeless body of Caleb Callahan. He knelt, checked the pulse, then stood straight. "It's done," he said. His voice carried heavy finality. Clara stood on the porch, veil at her feet. Her hair clung to her face, her hands trembling. She looked at her brother's body, and though relief shone in her eyes, grief cut through too. Caleb had been cruel, but he was still blood. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and unashamed. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. She leaned into the touch for a moment, drawing strength from the simple gesture. The sheriff turned to the townsfolk. "You all saw it. The gang came here to kill her, and Cain fought to protect her. She's no outlaw. She's been hunted by her own kin." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The storekeeper shifted his hat awkwardly. The blacksmith cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Reckon we might have judged too quick." Others nodded, shame softening their faces. They had whispered, accused, and nearly turned her over to wolves. Now they looked at Clara with something different, something closer to respect. Dalton looked around at them, his words sharp. "Red Hollow won't be remembered as a town that turned its back on the truth. You owe this woman your silence, your safety, and maybe your lives. Don't forget it." The blacksmith bowed his head. "She's welcome here, long as she wants." For the first time, Clara raised her chin, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted her. She didn't speak, but her silence was strong enough. As the crowd drifted back toward town, Elias helped gather the bodies, dragging them away from the cabin. The sheriff lingered until the last outlaw was buried in shallow graves on the edge of the ridge. When it was done, Dalton tipped his hat. "You've got yourself a place here, miss. Don't waste it." Then he rode back toward town, leaving the ranch quiet again. The stars came out brighter than ever against the dark sky. Clara sat on the porch steps, her hands folded in her lap. The night air was cool, carrying the sound of crickets and the faint crackle of the dying fire. Elias joined her, lowering himself onto the step beside her. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "For years I've lived in shadows, always hiding, always waiting for the sound of hooves. Tonight it ended." Elias looked at her, his voice steady. "Ended because you faced it." Her eyes glistened in the starlight. "No, because you stood with me." For a moment, silence stretched between them, not empty but full, like the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath. The ranch was scarred, the valley stained with what had passed, but something new lingered in the quiet. Clara was no longer only a stranger beneath a veil. She was a woman with a name, a truth, and now perhaps a place she could belong. Morning came clear and golden, washing the valley in light. Smoke still lingered in thin wisps, but the silence was peaceful now, not heavy with fear. Clara stepped outside, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. She breathed in the crisp air, letting it fill her chest. For the first time in years, she felt no need to hide. Elias was already in the yard, mending the fence that had been broken in the fight. His movements were steady, his sleeves rolled, his face calm. He looked up as she approached, and something unspoken passed between them. A sense of survival, of promise. By noon, word had spread through Red Hollow. The sheriff had made it known. Clara was cleared of all suspicion. She had been the victim of her brother's lies, not his partner. The townsfolk gathered at the small square near the mercantile, some curious, some ashamed, all waiting. Clara stood beside Elias, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of every eye upon her. Once those eyes had burned with suspicion. Now they searched for something else. Perhaps forgiveness, perhaps strength. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward. His voice was firm, carrying across the crowd. Last night, truth came to light. Clara Callahan was never an outlaw. She stood against her own kin, and because of her, this town is safer. She deserves more than your whispers. She deserves your respect. The blacksmith was the first to nod. "We misjudged," he said simply, his voice rough with honesty. "You've got a place here if you'll take it." Others echoed him, murmured apologies, quiet words of welcome. Clara's hands trembled, but not with fear. For the first time, she felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. Then Elias did something that stilled the whole square. He reached for her veil, The same veil that had shielded her from the town, the same one that had fueled their gossip, and gently lifted it from her shoulders. He held it high for a moment, then let the wind carry it away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara's face was no longer hidden, her eyes clear, her expression steady. There was no shame there, only quiet strength. Elias spoke, his words low but strong enough for all to hear. This woman is not my burden. She is my choice, and I'll stand beside her as long as I draw breath. Silence followed, then something shifted. A few clapped. Others nodded. The judgment that had once poisoned the air was replaced by a fragile acceptance, and with it, the beginning of belonging. Clara turned to Elias, her voice a whisper, meant only for him. "You've given me back my name. My life." He met her gaze, eyes steady. "No, you claimed it yourself. I only stood close enough so you wouldn't fall." The sun dipped lower, bathing the square in warm light. For the first time since she had come veiled into Red Hollow, Clara smiled. Not a guarded smile, but one of release, of hope. The town began to disperse, leaving Clara and Elias standing at the center. Around them the frontier stretched wide and untamed. But within it something had been claimed, a new beginning. Born not of whispers or shadows, but of the truth laid bare. And as the wind carried her veil across the open land, Clara knew she would never wear it again. If you enjoyed this tale from the frontier, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Frontier Tales for more Wild West stories of love, grit, and redemption. Leave a comment to share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Until the next ride, partner, keep the fire burning.